Uh, hey buddy, I'm sorry for your loss. I hope this covers any expenses. What is this for? It's for whatever you need, but try to keep it within the backyard if you know what I'm saying. So anything I need, anything I want to do. Yeah, I'll support anything you want to do. You have the full backing of Germany behind you. The fuse to the European powder keg was lit and ready to explode. Any reason would have sufficed to start the conflict, and the Austrians were just given one on a silver platter with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. A century of hatred and alliances had built up for this moment. Decades of preparation would all come down to the next 4 years. The outcome of this war would redraw the world to an unimaginable way to our artists. Over the next few days, the war would escalate into the bloodiest war that the world had ever seen. A war that would kill millions and devastate the European continent. A war of empires that would spark a global war that would envelop the entire world into the flames of Europe. As you guys can tell, I'm still working on editing and commentary. I hope this one is much better than my first video, but like in the last video, the text wall on screen are videos for the future. If you are interested in future videos or like what you see, feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now back to the video. After the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, Germany gives Austria a blank check, basically saying you have the full support of the German Empire behind you. So the Austrians could now do anything they wanted to Serbia with the help of Germany, even if another European power stepped in, causing the Austrians to send an unacceptable ultimatum to the Serbians on the 23rd of July, almost a full month after Ferdinand's assassination. And it just so happens that the Serbs then run over to Russia and ask for aid. Russia will answer the call to protect their southern Slavs, so Serbia then refuses the Austrians, and the Austrians declare war on them on the 28th of July, beginning with an artillery bombardment of Belgrade. This then causes the Russians to begin their mobilization, which the Germans use as an act of war, then begin to mobilize themselves, declaring war on the Russians on the 1st of August. The Schlieffen Plan was the brainchild of a German field marshal, which was drawn up in 1905. The idea was that Germany would focus on the French first rather than the Russians, who they believed would take some time to mobilize and move to the Eastern Front. His idea was to completely focus on the French and to go around French fortifications on the German border, by invading through the neutral Belgium and then quickly taking Paris, forcing France to come to the negotiation table and surrender to the Germans, who would then quickly turn around and then focus on the Russians. To start the plan, Germany declared war on Luxembourg on the 2nd of August, as well as sending an ultimatum to Belgium to let German forces through their country. Belgium refuses Germany's entry and attempts to stay neutral, with the backing of Britain behind them if Germany does anything suspicious. However, on the 3rd of August, Germany declared war on France and Belgium in a surprise attack. The United Kingdom joins the war, backing Belgium's neutrality on the 4th of August, and the Belgians attempt to slow the Germans' advance near the fortress city of Liège, attempting to buy crucial time for Entente forces to enter Belgium and protect her. Germany then commits many massacres within the city, as well as across Belgium, what we would call today as war crimes. The British newspapers took these actions and began to run with it, in a propaganda campaign to smear the German image, turning neutral nations against Germany. The French, attempting to slow down the Germans in Belgium, launched Plan 17, that was made some years before. The plan was much like the German Schlieffen Plan, which was to attack through Belgium and encircle the Germans, and to take their industrial heartland. However, not wanting to get the British on the wrong side of the war, they changed the plan and focused on their lost province of Alsace-Lorraine, which they had lost in the Franco-Prussian War some decades before. They initiated an all-out attack in the region in a hopeful break into Germany and to cause the Germans surrender quickly. However, the German defenses were too strong, and France failed miserably. At the Battle of Mons on the 23rd of August, where British forces began to see their first taste of combat in the First World War, and attempted to stop the German advance towards Paris. However, they were heavily outnumbered and began to retreat into France. Overwhelmed by the Germans, the British and the French would leave Belgium to its fate and fall back to a better defensive position behind the river of Marne in France. As the Germans get ever closer to Paris, the French government retreats to the city of Bordeaux. The Entente halted the Germans in a desperate counterattack, capitalizing on German overextension and exhaustion, stopping them roughly 40 miles from the French capital of Paris in the First Battle of the Marne from the 6th to the 12th of September, causing the Germans to retreat to take up better defensive positions. The front then begins to somewhat stagnate. Then a battle of attempted flanking begins by both sides, and a race to the English Channel begins, causing the Belgian army to barely escape as the Germans cut them off from their homeland. At the end of the Battle of the Frontiers, which is the combination of all battles from the 12th of August to the 23rd, roughly 329,000 French casualties, 30,000 British casualties, and roughly 20,000 Belgian casualties, 6,000 of which were killed by the Germans in the first week of the war, known as the Rape of Belgium. The Germans would suffer 310,000 casualties at the end of the first month as well. Also, something I want to point out is that the French were awful at knowing who was dead and who wasn't. So the numbers that I do show throughout the video are not really known for a fact, but historians have attempted their best, and the casualties are as accurate as they can be. War has changed in Europe with the development of a bolt-action rifle, as well as the machine gun, the development of hand grenades, along with improvements in other military technologies like larger and more powerful artillery than in wars before, which at some points in the war can be heard from across the English Channel. Walking out in the open was nothing more than a death sentence to the troops on both sides, as well as improvements in the airplane, which had now begun to be used on both sides as a military weapon, being used for ground observation alongside dogfighting and bombardment of military and civilian targets, of which Germany used airships to bomb Paris and London multiple times. The Entente and the Central Powers, attempting to hide their troops from this slaughter, had begun a new military tactic called trench warfare. In October, both sides began to dig in, and roughly 400 miles of trenches began to be dug on both sides of the war, stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps. And throughout the whole war, roughly 35,000 miles of trenches had been dug. That's enough trenches to encircle the earth 1.5 times. The trenches were often cramped, muddy, wet, cold, and infested with fat rats that ate the dead. And when I mean fat rats, I mean rats so large that they'd give New York rats a run for their money. It would often be so wet in these trenches, if you got wet, you would never begin to dry off unless you were able to leave the trench. Often trench foot would begin to take the soldiers' feet. Trench foot happens when someone's foot stays so wet for so long it begins to die, and the skin rubs off and gets infected. The only way to fix this is to get out of the cold and wet trenches or to cut the limb off entirely. Roughly 100,000 Entente soldiers were affected by trench foot during the First World War. Now there's a key player missing. Can you see him? Yep, it's Italy, who decides to stay neutral because a triple alliance only is enacted when a nation declares war on the members within the alliance. But both Austria and Germany just so happen to declare war on Serbia and Russia. So technically the deal is void, and the Italians stay neutral, not wanting to get involved. Even though Germany has expanded its fleet, it is still outnumbered by the British. They have small skirmishes but no clear winner. Germany bombards the English coastline, but does not look for any major battle on the surface for the remainder of 1914 because of the cost of losing its ship. So the British, with naval superiority, began to blockade and starve out the Germans in an attempt to destroy its economy and end the war as fast as possible. Germany, trying to counterbalance this, introduced a new technology called U-boats to do the same thing to the British and the French. The Germans would sink convoys of food, weapons, and troops who had attempted to enter or leave Britain in unrestricted submarine warfare. In the east, the Russians invade the province of East Prussia with little resistance due to most of the German war machine being in the west, attempting to seize Paris. However, the disorganized Russians, who also used unencrypted telegrams to communicate, found themselves defeated in the Battle of Tannenberg from the 26th to 30th of August, where roughly 90,000 Russians were captured as POWs, along with the Battle of the Masurian Lakes from the 7th to the 14th of September. The Russians retreated from Prussia and suffered somewhere near 300,000 casualties in their defeats. Austria is kept out of Serbia at the Battle of the Sur from the 15th to the 24th of August, as well as their offensive in the east failing spectacularly, losing somewhere near 300,000 men. To relieve the Austrians, the Germans came in with a counterattack to Warsaw to slow down the Russian attack, forcing them to relocate troops to the north. A brutal winter campaign began to set in the east with no clear winner. The Austrian army is lacking proper leadership and training, as well as they have a language barrier between all their soldiers because not everyone speaks the German language. The German and Hungarian captains can't speak to the lower enlisted, who were often Serbs, Czechs, Slovaks, or Romanians. So proper communication was very limited, and most of the Austrian army was very disorganized. The Ottomans were split on joining the war or staying neutral, till someone had ordered the fleet to bomb the Russian city ports of Odessa and Sevastopol, forcing the Ottomans into the war on the 29th of October, joining the Central Powers. The Ottomans would also attack the Russians into the Caucasus, which failed miserably. The Ottomans would later blame the Armenians for their failures in the Caucasus against the Russians, as well as an attempt to take the Suez Canal from the British to cut the artery from the British Empire. The Ottomans were stopped and halted just outside of the Suez. Japan joins the Entente on the 17th of November, attacking the German-Chinese trade city of Guangdong, as well as other German colonies in the Pacific. It is important to know that the German African colonies are cut off, and there will be no reinforcements, so the Germans recruit local African militias. With these militias, they would attack the British and the French in a long and drawn-out guerrilla war in Africa, drawing many resources that can be used in Europe, and they become a thorn in the side to the British and the French. Battles take place in a now heavily entrenched Western Front, with the French taking the initiative and being bounced off the Germans. No side is able to break the other, and casualties keep rising, and no real gain is ever made. Morale begins to lessen. In the Western Front, there were segments that had truces on the 25th of December, where troops from both sides would exchange food rations, gifts from home, and personal items, as well as played football matches in the no man's land. The higher-ups did not like this and clamped down on the insubordination, due to the lack of following orders and the hesitation that would come with killing a man that you just broke bread with. This would be the last time an armistice would ever happen in a war like this. The war at this point had lasted longer than both sides had planned for, and neither side knew how long it would last. But neither side wanted the war to end because they felt victory was near. This is something that will become very common in high command on both sides of the war. But the men and their families were promised to be home by Christmas, and Christmas came and Christmas went, and the war raged on. On the Western Front alone, nearly 2 million casualties have taken place within a span of 5 months. That is dead or wounded, civilian or military. Sadly, I cannot find an exact number, but this is the rough estimate that I could find. I also could not find a number for the Eastern Front, nor casualties in the Middle East or Africa. If you know any of these numbers, please let us know down in the comments.